Okay, let's talk about anonymous functions in Dart. Cool. So most functions are named. We use the typical way of, let me clear this out. We use the typical way of defining a function like integer, do something. So we want to return an integer, we give it the type, here's the name of the function, maybe it takes some stuff, and then it just returns whatever we're doing, 3 times 4, okay? That's what do something does, and then we can call that named function like so, and it's just gonna, it's not gonna print anything, but it's just gonna do it, and return that thing that satisfies that return type. So this is a named function. Type, name, logic. You can also create a nameless function, which is called an anonymous function. Sometimes you'll see it as a lambda or closure, and you might assign an anonymous function to a variable so that, for example, you can add or remove it from a collection. The one thing about assigning it to a variable is that I tend to think that the variable is now the name for that function. It's just a different way to define it. But there could be some differences under the hood when you actually do that. One thing about this is when you do this, if you have your linter turn on, you will see that it will advise you against using the anonymous function like that. Okay, I'll show you that in a second. And it, they look just like named functions, they just don't have a name. That's the only thing. Okay, you can ignore this. This is just fancy language spec notation, or get familiar with it if you want to write things this way. We'll just look at actual examples that are more concrete. But before we get to the example, there's an entire Wikipedia entry. Looks like anonymous functions came back from the world of lambda calculus before computers, electronic computers, were a thing, and that's where that term lambda comes from for that. Okay, so an anonymous function in Dart, we've seen them called function literals as well. Here's all the different ways using the lambda word to explain them: abstraction, function, expression, or a block. Okay, it's a function that is not bound to an identifier, which for me, when you do the variable assignment, it is then, assigned to a variable. I don't know if it's bound in that sense, but it's assigned at least. And it's a way to refer to that chunk of logic. Okay, they're often arguments passed to higher order functions. Okay, so if you have a function that takes a function as an argument, that's a higher order function, and you can pass in, you can just write it on the fly, the anonymous function, instead of passing in a named one. Okay, another reason people use anonymous functions is it's logic that's used only once or a few times. And so it's part of your larger function or logic in a program. And it doesn't really make sense to give it a name, because it's kind of like a private function to a larger function, if you will. You can kind of think of it that way. Anonymous functions are ubiquitous, meaning they are everywhere and used in all of functional programming languages, like Elixir, for example. I think is a functional programming language. Okay, I think that's all I want to say there. There was one bit down here about use of anonymous functions as a matter of style. So the thing that I like about this is that means it's not very consequential whether I decide to use them or not. As a programmer, as a Flutter developer, the fewer decisions I have to make about the language, the better. I prefer the strong opinions that I can just use because I just want to build apps and solve real-world problems with the technology. I don't necessarily want to think about the technology, like should I use an anonymous function here? Should I name it? that sort of thing. So that's also why I like the linter rule that says don't use the variable assignment for a function, or don't use function literals in forEach, I think is what that is. Okay. Yeah. So that's what I want to explain there. They have one example of Dart here. This is the anonymous function on the right. This is the variable assignment on the left. I don't really like this example because whenever you call this, it looks like you're calling a named function. Okay. Yeah, this is more, in my mind, an anonymous function. Is that even the right number of parentheses? I have to find out real quick. It just looks off, doesn't it? That closes the, oh, it's the larger thing. Okay, so the entire bit is encapsulated. Okay. Sometimes in programming you'll see people put spaces between things like this just to make it super clear. So there's like my variable. Well, actually, I don't. Yeah. Why can't I see? It's because that's the function doing something. And then what is this 5? It's just like another parentheses. Can you do multiplication like that? Or you just pass in 5 somehow? That's interesting. So I don't think I've ever seen it like that, where that's how you define the anonymous function and then pass in a variable, or pass in, you know, the thing at the time. Okay, that's weird. Unless I'm just not seeing that for some reason. But that's what it looks like, okay? So there's my print statement. Here is, again, these parentheses are hard for me to see. Okay, like so, and then you have 5. So like this is the anonymous function, and this is the argument that you pass in to x. Yeah, so I haven't seen this before, where you actually have this all in one line. Okay, that is very interesting. Okay, I didn't see that before when I reviewed that, but that's good to see. Yeah, it's kind of the same thing as that. Again, it's like having a named function because you're using a variable, but here you're just doing it without the variable assignment. Okay, so that's it from the Wikipedia page. Let's go on to look at this example. There's an untyped parameter, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I'll show you what they are talking about here. I'm going to get rid of that and format. Okay, what we have here is a list of strings. It's a const. I don't know if that matters. But for each of those things, this is the anonymous function. Okay, take the thing as an item and then print it. So first thing comes in is apple. Okay, you print the index of apple is going to be 0. It's in the 0th place. 0 colon and then string interpolate apple, so forth and so on. 1 bananas, 2 oranges. Let's see if that works. And there it is. This is the anonymous function part. This is where you have some logic and it doesn't have a name. It's just splattered right into the forEach. Okay, and so that takes a function, right? If you wanted to extract this, I'm just going to highlight from the block variable or whatever that's called, and the block itself. Now remember, we called these blocks up here, didn't we? That was another way to refer to it. Okay, so I'm going to Command X, Command V. So now we have this sort of anonymous, or kind of looks like a naked function, you know? it's going to return void because it's printing something, and then we just have to give it a name. Let's call it print something. Okay, so there's an item, and it's just gonna print something. So now instead of having the logic itself, it's passing the name for that logic, which is print something. Okay, and that should work. If you wanted to do that whole thing where they talk about, oh, this is just talking about making it a one-liner. From functions as first-class objects, we did this thing at the end where they showed an example of an anonymous function. They had a nice segue there. They did this whole variable assignment thing. So let's do that, and I'll show you the error you get with a warning. So this is print something. Okay, we're going to have an equal sign. And it looks like you can do it like this is valid using this block notation. We could get rid of these curly braces and make it an arrow function, but instead let's just leave it like this. If you wanted to somehow format that to make it look, all appropriate, so you can see what it's doing, right? So there's our variable assignment here. There's our block variable that we're using, and then here's the logic between the curly braces. But like I say, you could just do that. Okay, now this is the same thing, and it should still work. Okay, but we get this info message down here: use a function declaration to bind a function to a name. So right now we can refer to the anonymous function or unnamed function by the name of this variable, but maybe it's not bound in this sense. In a technical sense. So in that regard, it's more than just style. It's more than just a matter of style. I don't know if that's the case or not. This might be a good question to ask someone in the forums, the Flutter community forums, or in Stack Overflow. Yeah, but yeah, so here they also say use function declarations in place of function literals, which is also an anonymous function. Okay, so so instead of doing this, they say, hey, why don't you just do this? Let's just make it a proper function. Okay, so you see what I did there? Var became void. Now we have a proper function declaration. This came over and it hugs next to the name. There's our arrow. We could have used a block and put it on multiple lines. Let's see if that works. Okay, and there we go. That is an anonymous function run through in the documentation. We will get to lexical scope next time, which talks about the variables, where they exist in your program, and whether or not your program can see them, and how much of your program they can see. All right, see you next time.